In 1958, Hollywood watched Marilyn Monroe dismantle a multi-million-dollar set with her chaos and her tears. But she stopped filming not for a meltdown, but for the most heartbreaking reason imaginable. In the shadows of her fame, she whispered 7 secret words to an invisible extra, a message so powerful it saved his life and momentarily saved her own soul. In Hollywood history, few sets were as bright and yet as deeply shadowed as the soundstage where Marilyn Monroe was making Some Like It Hot in 1958. The air on that closed set was thick, heavy, and hot, not with the heat of the stage lights, but with the suffocating pressure surrounding the world's most famous woman. Everyone saw the platinum blonde bombshell, but behind the scenes, an invisible clock was ticking, counting down to another potential collapse. This wasn't a movie set, it was a psychological pressure cooker, with Marilyn, known to some as the incomparable Miss Sugar Cane, trapped at the very heart of the steam. Billy Wilder, the genius director, was an artist carving a comedy out of sheer frustration. With Marilyn, his witty impatience curdled into silent, icy fury. He refused to yell or plead, he simply watched, his silence more terrifying than any scream. The entire crew felt it. The 60 or so technicians, the customers, the cameramen, they moved in hushed, exhausted reverence and fear. They were making cinematic history, but the price was being paid by the woman whose mere presence filled the screen. Marilyn herself was a study in profound, aching contradiction. She was perpetually late, sometimes by hours. When she finally arrived, she moved like a ghost, distant, her eyes conveying a deep, unshakable isolation. Yet, when the cameras rolled, the transformation was instant and total. She became Sugar Cane, radiating a dizzying, effervescent joy that fooled millions. But the crew knew the truth. The glamour was a mask, a brilliant facade hiding a deep, unhealed wound. Her legendary beauty was also the source of her profound internal struggle. The scripts were simple, the lines short, but getting those words out was an agonizing process. Take after take, the lines would be flubbed, the rhythm lost. The expense was enormous, the tension unbearable. It wasn't simple petulance, it was something fragile breaking inside her, a cry for help disguised as cinematic sabotage. Every failure to deliver a line was a retreat further inside the wall she had built around Norma Jean, the little girl who was constantly abandoned and overlooked. The tragic reality was that she was creating gold, comedy that would last forever, while she herself was quietly fading under the immense pressure of living up to the myth. Her struggle was visible for anyone to see, but everyone was too focused on the production, the budget, and the takes to truly see the woman. It was a tragedy unfolding in plain sight, a heartbreaking paradox where the most desired woman in the world felt utterly, completely unseen. That day, the atmosphere was particularly poisonous. The scene required a simple walk and a simple 2-word greeting, yet they had been attempting it since 7 that morning. Marilyn was frayed, her eyes flickering nervously, and the crew was ready to snap. The set felt like a bomb waiting for a final, catastrophic spark. It was into this emotional inferno that the seemingly least important person on set would step, a young extra whose own private storm was about to collide with Marilyn's devastating personal turmoil. A background figure, just a face in the crowd, stood silently, carrying a secret burden heavier than the entire film production. While the entire soundstage revolved around the luminous, chaotic sun that was Marilyn Monroe, there were people existing on the periphery of fame, so quiet and focused they were functionally invisible. One was Daniel, a young extra who moved with meticulous, painful diligence completely at odds with the frantic energy of the set. He was just a face in the background, yet he carried a story so weighty it could crush the most hardened Hollywood veteran. Daniel wasn't chasing a dream of stardom, he was chasing survival for someone else. He was 21 years old, clean-cut and perpetually exhausted, working 3 different part-time jobs just to keep a single, life-saving flame burning. His younger sister, Sarah, only 8, suffered from a debilitating, complex medical condition that required specialized care far beyond what his family could afford. Every single dollar Daniel earned from standing silently in a rented tuxedo, every meal he skipped, every hour of sleep he sacrificed, was converted directly into the desperate hope of seeing Sarah get better. He felt the crushing weight of failure every hour. To be an extra felt frivolous, a ridiculous way to earn money when a child's life hung in the balance. But this job, however minor, paid slightly better than waiting tables, and the few extra cents meant one more hour of therapy, one more prescription filled. Daniel understood the cruel mathematics of poverty and severe illness. A few pennies here, a few dollars there, multiplied by relentless exhaustion, equaled a slim chance at saving his sister. The irony of his situation was a constant bitter ache. He was surrounded by wealth, by the extravagant waste of a film set, the mountains of catering, the bespoke costumes, while his sister needed simple, essential care. He was a perfect portrait of quiet desperation, the opposite of the drama unfolding around the star. He never complained or spoke to the other extras. He simply did his job, standing perfectly still, his eyes focused on a distant internal point of agonizing worry. To survive the sheer emotional exhaustion, Daniel relied on one small tangible anchor, a child's drawing. It was a picture Sarah had made months ago of a brightly colored, impossibly perfect house. He kept it folded into a tiny stiff square in the inner pocket of his extra jacket. It wasn't a reminder of hope, but a reminder of the colossal stakes. Every time he felt his shoulders slump or his focus wander, he would press his hand against his chest, a subtle, subconscious gesture, feeling the outline of that paper square. It was his secret communication with Sarah, a promise that he would not rest until he had earned enough to buy her a house where they could all finally be safe and whole. Nobody on that set knew his name, face, or purpose. He was the ghost in the machine, convinced that if he failed, his sister's struggle would be a direct consequence of his inadequacy. It was a burden too heavy for a young man to carry alone, and the very air of the set seemed to intensify Daniel's crushing, invisible private storm. He was searching for a miracle, and he had come to the one place in the world where miracles were only manufactured for the camera. The breaking point didn't arrive with a scream or a crash of scenery. It came with the terrifying, agonizing sound of silence after the 45th failed attempt. The line was just 3 words. "It's me, Sugar." Yet Marilyn Monroe simply could not say it. 45 times the cameras had rolled, the money had burned, and the star had flubbed the simplest dialogue, turning a quick scene into a marathon of mounting despair. The futility of the scene was a cosmic joke being played on Hollywood. Here was a woman born for the camera, struggling with words a child could master. But the problem wasn't the words. It was the pressure that turned her mind into a prison. With every failed take, her eyes would flicker with a helpless panic, a desperate fear of disappointing the legions of people who depended on her myth. When the tally hit 47, Billy Wilder performed the ultimate act of defeat. He didn't erupt. He simply turned his back to the cameras, walked slowly to his chair, and took off his hat with a gesture of pure, abject hopelessness. The genius who could tame any script had encountered the one force he could not command, the inner torment of Marilyn Monroe. The moment Wilder abandoned his post, the air of authority on the set evaporated, leaving behind a vacuum of chaos. The crew scattered, flustered, and scrambling. Assistants rushed Marilyn, but their movements were frantic and useless. Marilyn seemed to retreat into herself, her magnificent white dress becoming a shroud, the makeup a pallid mask. Her despair wasn't a fit of pique. It was a visible, childish helplessness. She didn't look angry. She looked lost, standing beneath the harsh glow of the soundstage, surrounded by 500 people. She looked smaller than anyone, a lonely little girl yearning for escape. The scene descended into a frozen tableau of anxiety. The cameramen stared at their feet. The lighting technicians adjusted imaginary knobs. And the extras, Daniel among them, were trained to remain absolutely still, the perfectly polished background to the star's implosion. Daniel, standing near the back, felt his own heart pound in rhythm with the set's mounting stress. His private worry was being compounded by this monumental, agonizing waste of time. He pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the small, folded paper sketch of the house, a subconscious reminder of the high stakes he was playing for. Marilyn, ignoring her handlers, simply stared across the set, her gaze unfocused, drifting over the crew and the vastness of the empty stage. For a long, strained moment, she was utterly still, the legend holding an entire industry, captive with her fragility. She was not the dazzling sugarcane. She was Norma Jean, trapped and terrified, her tears threatening to break the immaculate professional veneer. The soundstage was an emotional tinderbox. She was looking for a way out, and in that moment of overwhelming personal collapse, her eyes were about to find the one person who was not looking at her at all, but only at his own impossible, heartbreaking burden. In the silent aftermath of Billy Wilder's retreat, the soundstage was held in a terrifying emotional stasis. Then Marilyn moved, not toward her frantic handlers, but away from the light, her famous gaze locking onto something in the distance. It was a moment of profound, quiet observation, a flicker of Norma Jean cutting through the veneer of Marilyn Monroe. She was ignoring the universe that revolved around her. The whispers of her assistant, the desperate signals from the producers, all faded into background noise as her attention became absolute. Her gaze settled deep in the shadows on the figure of a young man, an extra, who was standing as rigidly as a statue. This was Daniel, and in his stillness, Marilyn saw a kindred spirit of silent, private affliction. Daniel wasn't looking at the star. He was looking inward, wrestling with the impossible weight of Sarah's illness. In a reflexive, unconscious motion born of worry, he pressed his hand to the inner pocket of his rented tuxedo, feeling the outline of the children's drawing, the bright image of the home he was fighting to provide. It was a gesture of profound, hidden stress, and Marilyn saw it. She didn't see the uniformed extra. She saw the posture of a soul under siege. She saw the familiar, painful isolation of a person trying desperately to keep their greatest fear from showing. It was a recognition that transcended fame, a mirror reflecting her own inner landscape. She understood with instantaneous clarity that the pressure on this young man was not about a movie line, but about something elemental, survival and love. Marilyn Monroe had been abandoned and overlooked throughout her entire childhood. She knew the feeling of needing validation, of desperately wishing someone, anyone, would see the frightened little girl beneath the facade. And in Daniel's simple, anxious gesture, she saw the same unspoken plea. She saw not an extra, but a human being struggling under a colossal, invisible weight far heavier than the demands of a Hollywood comedy. The 35 years of loneliness and yearning suddenly channeled into a single, magnetic wave of compassion. The set was dead silent, waiting for the star's next move, expecting a tantrum or an exit. Instead, they watched, baffled as the most famous woman in the world simply stood still, her eyes locked on an invisible man in the shadows. It was the moment the fictional Sugar Cane dropped her guard, and the real Norma Jean reached out across the vast chasm of fame to acknowledge a shared, heartbreaking reality. In that single, drawn-out moment of profound, quiet observation, the course of the film and one young man's life was about to fundamentally shift. 5 minutes bled into 6, the silence on the soundstage becoming a deafening, throbbing entity. Then Marilyn moved. She took a long, slow, deliberate breath, and with measured grace, she slowly peeled off her immaculate white satin gloves. The moment felt ritualistic, an unmistakable signal that the star was shedding the trappings of the performance, and what came next was entirely real. The word she spoke was not her line, it was a single authoritative command that instantly shattered the paralysis of the set. Cut. No one in the history of cinema had heard an actor command a multi-million-dollar set to stop without the director or a producer present. The film's machinery ground instantly to a halt. The camera operators froze, the sound man dropped his headphones. It was an act of unilateral power so profound and unexpected that it went straight to sheer disbelief. A flurry of confused, angry movement erupted from the producer's corner. They rushed forward, whispering furiously about the budget and the schedule. The crew whispered, convinced this was simply her latest, costly act of sabotage. They saw a spoiled diva holding the set hostage. They failed to see the quiet, resolute purpose in her eyes. Marilyn ignored every one of them. She brushed past her panicked assistant, her famous gaze still fixed on that solitary figure in the shadows. The sound of her high-heeled shoe clicking on the concrete floor was the only thing that cut through the silence now. A slow, rhythmic, inevitable sound of destiny. Her entire focus was on Daniel, who stood rigid in his extra tuxedo, suddenly feeling the weight of the entire universe pressing down on him. Daniel's blood ran cold. He felt a terror far greater than any fear of getting fired. He was certain she was coming to dismiss him. His mind screamed for the ground to swallow him whole. He felt his hands tighten into fists inside his tuxedo pockets, brushing against the crinkled paper drawing, the only thing that mattered. Marilyn, the son of Hollywood, was leaving the warmth of her key light and walking directly into the shadows, an area reserved only for the unseen. She was moving to acknowledge an invisible pain, driven not by the script, but by a deeper, human imperative. She had stopped the entire machine to perform a tiny personal act of profound recognition that only one man on that entire set was about to witness. The sheer audacity of her actions sealed the secret, creating a wall of baffled confusion that made her next move completely private. The silence returned, more absolute than before, as Marilyn finally reached the very edge of the background. She was there, standing directly in front of the young extra who carried the weight of a seriously ill sister, and the entire production held its breath, waiting for the star to speak. But the words that would come next would not be for the camera. They would be a private, compassionate balm delivered from one wounded soul to another. Her slow walk across the stage was the longest moment the Some Like It Hot crew would ever witness, a silent, surreal pilgrimage. With every graceful, measured step, Marilyn moved further away from the safety of her famous persona and deeper into the emotional vulnerability of Norma Jean, heading straight for the young man she alone had truly seen. The suspense was nearly unbearable. The entire crew watched every movement, convinced they were about to witness the ultimate Hollywood scandal. But Marilyn was oblivious to their scrutiny, her purpose pure. She was on a mission of compassion, and no desperate plea from a producer was going to stop her. Daniel, the object of this terrifying attention, was a statue of mounting anxiety. The blood pounded in his ears, drowning out the frantic whispers from the crew. He was paralyzed, convinced this was the end of his only source of reliable income. He reviewed every moment of the day in a dizzying flash. He felt the crushing pressure of his failure, all centered on the approach of this dazzling, troubled star. As she drew closer, the details of her beauty became intensely real. Her perfume was a soft, elegant cloud. Her smile was absent, replaced by an expression of deep, almost melancholic empathy. This was a woman of immense, heartbreaking seriousness, and the change was startling. Daniel instinctively took a step back, a silent, desperate plea for her to leave him in his safe anonymity. But Marilyn's steps were inexorable. She was moving from the light where the laughter was manufactured into the cool, authentic shadow where real burdens were carried. She closed the final few feet of separation, stopping inches from him. The distance between the world's greatest star and its most unnoticed extra had vanished. The only sounds now were the high, rhythmic click of her heel and the monotonous, desperate whir of the cooling fan above them, the sound of time and money burning up against the silence of Daniel's fear. Marilyn's full attention was entirely on him. She looked directly into his eyes, seeing the profound, desperate fear he had tried so hard to hide. She had walked through the fire of her own fame to reach the quiet desperation of a stranger, and Daniel knew the world had irrevocably shifted. He stood frozen, waiting for the word of dismissal that would ruin him, completely unprepared for the small, sacred act of kindness that was about to unfold. Marilyn stopped inches away from Daniel. In that instant, the massive soundstage shrank to a private, silent bubble. She reached up, not to touch him, but to raise her hand just enough to momentarily block the harsh, blinding intensity of the key light from his face, a simple, tender act of protection. It was the movement of Norma Jean, shielding a fellow soul from the brutal glare of the world. Daniel was utterly transfixed, his terror replaced by profound, breathless astonishment. He was looking into the eyes of the most famous woman on earth, and for the first time in months he felt truly seen, not as a prop, but as a person weighed down by unspeakable worry. He waited for the reprimand, but it never came. Instead, Marilyn leaned in close, her voice a low, intimate whisper that was completely lost to the boom mics. The sound crew recorded nothing but the faint whir of the cooling fans. This was a conversation not meant for Hollywood, but only for the heart. The words had to be whispered, too true and too genuine to be captured on the industry's tape, for they would have shattered the entire illusion of the film. It was a secret passed between two people who understood the aching emptiness of being alone in a crowd. Then she delivered the 7 words that would fundamentally rewrite the course of Daniel's life. She spoke to them softly, directly referencing the pressure of his hand against his pocket, a miraculous sign that she had understood his secret. She looked into his soul and whispered, "Please, save your love for who needs it most." The power of those words was shattering. They were a direct, compassionate acknowledgement of his burden, his sister, and the fierce, quiet love that was fueling his desperation. She simply validated the why of his struggle, giving him permission to believe that his sacrifice mattered more than the chaos on the set. It was a moment of grace, where the world's most glamorous woman told an invisible extra that his quiet, personal fight was more important than her own fame. Daniel's composure, maintained through 3 grueling jobs, finally broke. Tears, silent and profound, instantly welled up in his eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming cathartic relief. The burden he had carried alone was momentarily lightened by the recognition of the stranger. It was the knowledge that someone, especially her, had witnessed his pain that finally allowed him to release it. Marilyn gave him a brief, sorrowful smile, the pure, unpracticed smile of Norma Jean. She offered no further explanation or waited for a response. The moment of mercy was complete. She turned slowly, leaving Daniel standing in the shadows with the world's most emotional secret, and began the long, determined walk back to her mark. The single, fragile word of kindness had been delivered, and now the legend had a scene to film. The stunned crew watched Marilyn return, but the only change was in Daniel, who stood silently weeping in the corner, his heart laid bare by the most famous woman in the world. He understood immediately that the true story of this day would not be the 50th take, but the 7 words that had just given his invisible life profound, unforgettable meaning. As Marilyn Monroe reached her mark, she performed a transformation so seamless it defied logic, snapping instantly from the vulnerable Norma Jean back into the incandescent sugar cane. The cue was given, the cameras rolled, and on the 52nd take, she delivered the 3 words, "It's me, sugar," with a flawless, dizzying brilliance that made the 4 hours of chaos instantly vanish. It was a masterpiece of casual perfection, making the preceding melodrama seem like a necessary artistic preparation. The real drama, the true seismic shift, had happened silently in the shadows. The instant Marilyn completed the take, she walked off set, her work for the day done. The crew cheered with a relieved, nervous energy. Billy Wilder, who had returned, assumed the erratic stoppage had, somehow, been part of his star's baffling process. The secret of the 7 words was safe, sealed by the sheer distraction of cinematic success. Only Daniel remained in the aftermath, standing perfectly still, a single tear tracing a path through the makeup. His tears were no longer born of fear, but of overwhelming profound catharsis. He had been seen. The world's greatest star had deliberately forfeited her fame to validate his secret struggle. He was given a precious, invisible gift, the understanding that his mission of love for his sister was truly meaningful. He stood there, gripping the folded drawing in his pocket, realizing the words weren't a Hollywood directive. They were a lifeline. Please, save your love, for who needs it most? Marilyn had recognized his pure intention and, instead of offering money, she offered validation, a far more powerful currency. She told him that the person who needed his love most was Sarah, and that his dedication to her was his true, most important script. Daniel knew with certainty that he could never share this moment. The crew would have twisted it into gossip, missing the sincerity of her heart. The moment belonged only to him and the memory of the sorrowful smile she had given him. He consciously resolved to keep the 7 words locked away, a private mantra, a sacred truth more valuable than any tell-all interview could ever provide. From that day forward, Daniel carried himself differently. He was still an extra, still working 3 jobs, but the burden felt lighter. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was tempered by the knowledge that his purpose had been seen and affirmed by someone who understood the true cost of being an emotional spectacle. He had witnessed an act of authentic, beautiful humanity, a reminder that fame means nothing compared to the quiet duties of the heart. The chaotic set had closed its doors, completely unaware that a great star had stopped Hollywood for his 7 words of grace. The film went on to become an iconic comedy, but for Daniel, the real masterpiece was not what was captured on celluloid, but the private, tear-stained moment he was shown that his own life mattered. The secret was now sealed, yet its power would only grow, slowly reshaping the destiny of the young man who had been told to save his love. 2 decades later, Daniel was no longer chasing roles in the shadows. He had become a Pulitzer Prize-winning screenwriter whose work resonated with profound human dignity. The trajectory of his life, once steered by panic, had been rewritten by 7 whispered words of grace. The change was seismic. Marilyn Monroe's simple act of seeing him had fundamentally recalibrated his ambition. He realized his purpose was never to be on the screen. His purpose was to stand behind the camera, giving a voice to the invisible, to the forgotten, to the Sarahs of the world. He understood that the most powerful form of love was making someone feel truly seen. His early scripts, steeped in the reality of struggle and the fierce protective love between siblings, struck a chord of genuine emotion. He wrote about the people who carried the immense burdens that the rest of the world overlooked. These were the characters who pressed a silent hand to their heart, protecting a fragile secret hope, and his audience recognized the authentic pain and resilience. Success followed quickly, not the loud success of a movie star, but the quiet, enduring success of a true artist. With the money he earned, he was finally able to provide the care his sister Sarah needed. She didn't just get the best doctors, she got the comfort and safety that he had yearned to give her. They moved into a small, brightly colored house, a perfect echo of the house she had drawn all those years ago. The small, folded drawing, once a symbol of his burden, became a treasured relic, framed and placed on his desk. The 7 words, "Please, save your love for who needs it most," had become his private mantra. They guided his career, ensuring he never wrote for fame alone, but always for the heart. Every time he faced an artistic decision, he remembered Marilyn's solemn gaze. When a studio executive tried to convince Daniel to change his artistic vision for higher profits, Daniel silently repeated the mantra, using it as an internal shield to block the temptation of fame, ensuring his work always retained its genuine heart. The words reminded him that the love he had for his sister was the most important thing, and his work was simply the extension of that devotion. He grew into a man known not just for his talent, but for his deep compassion. When reporters asked him about his artistic motivation, he spoke vaguely of an early inspiration on a film set, never revealing the true story. The secret was sealed, a precious testament to the genuine Norma Jean, far away from the blinding lights of the Marilyn myth. He had taken her vulnerable moment and used it to write not just scripts, but a truly beautiful life. Though the actress had departed the world years ago, her 7 whispered words had saved 2 lives, Daniel's by giving him purpose, and Sarah's by giving her a chance. He had one final, profound thing to say about that day, a final chance to honor the compassion of the woman behind the legend, and the world was about to hear it. After years of silence, Daniel sat down for what he promised would be his final major television interview, a moment where the world expected him to talk about Oscars. Instead, he promised to finally reveal the true, unknown secret of the Some Like It hot set, the most emotional moment that no camera ever recorded. The interview was broadcast live. The host, sensing the emotional weight, was respectful but persistent, trying to guide Daniel toward the sensational gossip. Daniel smiled gently. He deflected the legend and the myth, building the suspense with the quiet authority of a man who held a sacred trust. The secret of that day wasn't about the star's breakdown, Daniel began. It was about her recognition. He then recounted the entire incident, but not from the perspective of the extra, from the perspective of the invisible man who had carried the crushing, private burden of his sister's struggle. He spoke of the desperate mathematics of survival and of the habit of pressing his hand to his inner pocket. The camera zoomed in tight as he described Marilyn's defiant walk across the soundstage to stop directly in front of him. "She saw me," he said. "She didn't see an extra. She saw my pain. She saw my sister's drawing." He paused, letting the silence convey the immense gravity of the moment. And then, Daniel continued, his eyes shining with profound emotion, she leaned in, and she whispered the 7 words that gave my life its direction, the 7 words I've lived by for 20 years, the 7 words that truly changed everything. He looked directly into the lens and finally revealed the secret. "Please, save your love for who needs it most." The studio audience gasped, a collective realization of the depth of this moment. They were not words of a diva, but words of a deeply wounded soul acknowledging another's pure love. Daniel then explained the ultimate poetry of her act. Marilyn, who had been constantly forced to spend her love on strangers, had instantly recognized the purest form of love in his life. She had stopped the entire demanding world to tell him to protect that love above all else. She saw the little girl in me who was fighting for her Sarah. Daniel concluded, "Marilyn Monroe, the symbol of Hollywood fantasy, saw my sacrifice and told me that my duty to my family was more important than the entire multi-million-dollar production. She gave me the validation she never received." He held up the small frame drawing of the house. "She stopped filming to give me permission to put love first. That is the true story of Some Like It Hot." The interview ended not with applause, but with a lingering, powerful silence. Daniel had taken her vulnerable moment and released it to the world, a precious and enduring testament to a simple, profound truth, that the greatest acts of kindness often happen in the quietest shadows, delivered by the people the world thinks are the most complicated. That day, Marilyn Monroe proved that the most important people in the world are often the ones no one is watching. If this story of hidden kindness and profound human connection touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to join us as we continue to reveal the secret, heartwarming truths behind the legends.